Hey folks, it's Lou with What If Resources for Just In Case Preparedness. And oftentimes when I'm having conversations with people, a reoccurring theme that constantly comes up is people are asking themselves, what would I do first in a wilderness emergency, right? Would I build a shelter? Would I start a fire? Would I signal for help? Exactly what is it that I would do? And the truth of it is every emergency is a little bit different, right? There's always constant uncontrollable variables. There's always inconsistent elements, whether weather elements, injuries, etc., whatever the case may be. And so there isn't one steadfast list that you really say, this is what I'm going to do first, this is what I'm going to do second, etc. But there is, or the way it was explained to me, was a concept called the principles of three. And if you understand that principles of three concept, then it will help you prioritize what you do first, what you do second, what you do third. And I want to share that with you because I think that's going to help a lot of people. Stick around. Hey folks, so what the principles of three is basically what the human body needs and exactly on average how long it will take before the human body perishes if it does not have those things. Okay, so again, it's averages. The average person, an average time frame, an average example. Okay, so don't take this to heart. Some people are going to say, hold on, I know somebody that lived longer than that without that one particular item, or I know somebody that perished sooner than that when they didn't have that particular item. Okay, understandable, but this is just an average. So please understand that. So on average, the human brain can only go 3 minutes without oxygen, okay? Another example of a principle of three on this specific line item is a human body will potentially bleed out if it suffers a major traumatic injury, will bleed out in 3 minutes, okay? So human brain, 3 minutes of oxygen, human body can bleed out within about 3 minutes of suffering a major injury. So, knowing that and understanding that this is a very time-sensitive item right here, you only have 3 minutes to try to get oxygen to somebody, or you only have 3 minutes to try to stop someone's massive bleeding, try to tie on a tourniquet or something like that. This 3 minutes right here, again, understanding the sensitivity of time, really lends towards first aid. Okay, so again, if a person isn't, this is averages and this is kind of how you work down the list. So if this is a scenario where a person has plenty of oxygen, then this is not applicable. If a person has not suffered a traumatic injury and they're bleeding out, then this is not a priority. But because of the time sensitivity, this is exactly what you have to consider first. If it's applicable, you have to address it. If it's not applicable, you simply go down to the next item. Okay? Sensitivity of time. Okay, the human body can only go approximately 3 hours when exposed to extreme weather conditions. We're talking about extreme heat, we're talking about extreme cold. Okay, wind, water, all those things come into play with that equation. Okay, so this is the next time sensitive item, 3 hours. Okay, and so if you are suffering exposure to extreme elements, then that would be the next item that you would want to address. Okay, and there's really 2 ways to address that. One is either to remove yourself from those elements or to protect yourself from those elements. Okay, so let's look at the first one, and then obviously the most preferred method would be to remove yourself from those elements, right? The preferred method of removing yourself from those elements is self-rescue, right? It's always best to rescue yourself. And so therefore, really the next thing to consider, because of the time sensitivity of this line item, is navigation. Can you navigate your way out of this scenario, right? And it may be, let's just say as an example, your ATV broke down. So you know where you're at, but there's, you know, a storm system moving in, and you know you need to remove yourself from those elements due to exposure. As long as you know where you're at, got a map, got a compass, whatever the case may be, GPS, then you remove yourself from that scenario. The next thing, the next option is, if you cannot remove yourself, then you may very well want to choose the option of having someone else help remove you. And that is referred to as signaling. Okay, so you may want to reach out to somebody to have them come rescue you, or have them come remove you from this environment. Okay, so that may very well be something as simple as your cell phone. It could be something as simple as a CB radio. It could be something a little bit more complex. You know, maybe you've got to use a signaling mirror and try to reach out to somebody up on a hillside or something like that. Or maybe use a signaling whistle and try to reach out to somebody, because you can hear somebody talking off in the distance, but maybe you can use a whistle to capture their attention and have them come help remove you from the environment. Okay. Interestingly enough, while we're talking about signaling real quick, again, principles of three, right? So when you are signaling, oftentimes volumes of three are the way to signal. Maybe 3 fires for the flame, maybe 3 smoke columns from fires. Maybe you're stranded in your pickup and you have some spray paint at your work truck or something like that. You have some spray paint and you can paint 3 X's, as an example, on the hood of your truck. Basically, 3s has a tendency to conjure up somebody recognizing that there's distress. Okay. Also, in addition to that, one of the best ways to signal is using Morse code for SOS. Okay, SOS. Interestingly enough, right? 3 letters in SOS. Okay, but here's really the cool part. How do you say SOS in Morse code? 3 dots, 3 lines, 3 dots. So again, this principle of 3 is applied, right? And so if that were a light source, it would be 3 fast ones. Say as an example, you just had a flashlight and you're trying to signal to somebody off in the distance, right? It'd be 3 fast, ding, ding, ding. 3 long, ding, ding, ding. 3 fast, dun, dun, dun. Okay. So, or a whistle if you're trying to reach out to somebody in an audible fashion. Now then, if you cannot remove yourself from the situation, if you cannot get somebody's attention to come with distress signaling to get somebody to come remove you from the situation, then knowing that you only have 3 hours to remove yourself from extreme elements, from exposure to the elements, then the next best way to protect yourself is to physically protect yourself from the elements. And so therefore, the next one is shelter. Again, if you can navigate your way out, you don't even need to go down the rest of this list. If you can signal your way out, you don't even need to go down the rest of this list. Okay. However, if none of these are options, you may have to build some form of a shelter. Hopefully you have a tarp, hopefully you have a poncho, maybe you do have a boat that is light enough that you can turn it upside down, help protect yourself from the wind or from the rain or whatever the case may be. So anyway, shelter would really be your next item right on down that list. Now then, with that being said, really the next thing to take into consideration when you're talking about time frames of what the human body on average will perish if it does not have, the human body can only go 3 days without water. So therefore, you need to be considering and thinking about access to potable, drinkable, safe water. Water consumption, hydration. Notice there's a little gap right in here. Okay, this gap is really where fire comes into play. You know what? I'm going to put that in black. That's really where fire comes into play. Some people refer to fire as the bridge between shelter and water. And the reason being is if you're building a shelter due to the fact that you are suffering exposure to elements, the truth of the matter is you may very well be cold, you may very well be wet. Fire helps dry you out. Fire helps warm you up. However, what if you're in an extreme heat environment, right? You need to hydrate rather quickly. So you need safe potable water. And oftentimes collecting the water may or may not be an issue, but assuming that you can collect the water, you may need to boil that water in order to make it safe to drink. Okay, again, fire comes into play. That's that bridge between shelter and water. It's also kind of the bridge between 3 hours and 3 days. So somewhere in that time frame, you need to establish your fire. Okay. By the way, fire, we just kind of mentioned that briefly, kind of skimmed over it, but fire is also a really good way of signaling, right? 3 fires utilizing the flame, 3 fires utilizing the plumes of smoke, right? So we kind of already talked about that. Okay, and then last but not least, this is always towards the bottom of a priority list. And that's because the human body, on average, can go 3 weeks without food. And that's why oftentimes people have a tendency to kind of skim over the whole food thing when they are instructing people on wilderness survival. Okay, now there's always some oddities, right? You see some people showing you some snares or some other type of method, tying some type of a crab cage or something like that in order to get some food. Truth of it is a lot of, quite frankly, experts that are in wilderness survival are not very proficient in the procurement of calories. And that's because it's the least time sensitive. Most wilderness survival scenarios, most people are rescued from that emergency within 3 days, 72 hours, within 3 days, on average. It's not saying you will be, just on average, most people are rescued within 3 days. Again, principles of 3, right? And so therefore, first aid, it's because it's so time sensitive for traumatic events. Talking major laceration, choking hazard, whatever case may be. 3 hours for extreme exposure to elements, to the weather, okay? You want to navigate your way out. You always want to rescue yourself if possible, but if that's not an option, you want to signal. Hopefully somebody else can come get you. If you have gotten yourself out of this scenario, none of the rest of these are even relevant. You don't even need to go down that list. But if you cannot signal your way out or navigate your way out, because you can only, the human body on average can only withstand 3 hours of exposure to extreme elements, sheltering would be your next option. Knowing that within 3 days you're going to have to hydrate with some water, fire is typically fits right in that little gap right there. That's the bridge, okay? It can also dry you out, it can help you signal, it can help warm you up, but it can also help purify that water and making it safe for human consumption. Last on the priority list is food. Yes, you should always carry some food with you, of course, when you're going out into the wilderness. But if you're in an emergency situation, you want to try to preserve as many calories as you can. Hopefully you've brought a tarp with you and you don't have to go carve a whole bunch of sticks and try to make a debris hut to protect yourself from the elements, hopefully, right? So you want to conserve calories. However, procuring those calories really is towards the bottom of the priority list. It's always good to know how. Of course it's good to know how. It's always good to have some type of a fishing kit with you. It's always good to have some type of a snare kit with you. It's always good to have those things because although the average scenario is rectified, wilderness emergency scenario is always rectified within 3 days, the truth of it is there's no guarantee you're going to get saved in 3 days. So therefore, food is something that you want to take into consideration. It's just that it's at the bottom of the priority list. Okay? We always have 7 items in survival: first aid, navigation, signaling, shelter, fire, water, food. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But by using the principles of 3, you can help prioritize that. And that really helped me to try to figure out, wrap my head around, well, what if I was in the desert? Well, what if I was in the mountains? What if I was at in the swamps? What if I was in the Pacific Ocean? You know, whatever the case may be, whatever the scenario was, the truth of it is there is no specific order. It's just that by using the principles of 3 and the time restraints that the human body can withstand certain things, that helps you prioritize. If you don't have a first aid emergency, first aid doesn't need to come first. If you're not exposed to extreme weather environments, exposure, things like that, then you may not have to worry about building a shelter, okay? But regardless, if you're stranded somehow, you should still try to navigate your way out or signal your way out, because if you can accomplish that, you don't need to take the other things into consideration anyway. So there you go. So folks, I hope this helped you as much as it helped me whenever I was first introduced to it. It's fairly easy to remember. 3 minutes, 3 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks. Okay. All right, folks. Thanks for joining me.